hardest part is figuring out what you want to master.
Focus on your product.
Can you tell somebody that they suck?
You gotta just go, this is exactly what I want to do for a living.
You can't even tell somebody that their breath is life.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with a, I'm really excited for this. I was going to say boss lady. I didn't even want to, I think it deserves a better title than that. I'm really excited for this interview because, number one, we don't know each other at all, which I like.
Nothing.
Because I get to truly get to know you.
Yep.
And I really admire your accomplishments.
Thank you.
You've done very hard, very real work.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm very excited.
I am too.
Let's start from the very beginning of your story. Where did you grow up?
I grew up about 30 miles north of here in Santa Clarita.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's the third largest city in LA, and it's the only one that's majority Republican.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you talk about political stuff openly?
Uh,
I guess this is what I'm trying
like
to
in
get at.
general?
We can cut it out if we need to.
Nothing's off limits for me.
Okay. So was that weird for you? Did you feel like you didn't fit in that?
Totally.
Okay.
I didn't fit in.
That's what I wanted to
I
get
am
at.
not. Yeah. I mean, no, I didn't.
Yep. And then what about brothers and sisters?
2 younger brothers.
So you're the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. And what, can you just kind of paint a picture for me what it was like growing up in that area? What did you do for fun? Were you always into business-minded stuff? Did you want to be an athlete? What did that look like?
So, so my father was a homicide detective for LAPD.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. And my mom is a first or second generation Italian American.
Okay.
And her whole family moved actually from Italy to Echo Park area.
Uh-huh.
So I pretty much grew up around here. My parents got divorced when I was 12.
Got it.
So the sort of pre-10 was really good, and probably post-14 was pretty good.
Yeah.
There's some crazy times in the middle.
Yeah.
But let's see, I was very close to my mom's family.
Yeah.
Very working class Italian family with all the richness associated with that.
Yeah.
Fun. Lots of family members I'm really still close to. And then on my father's side, he came from sort of a wealthy military family. I wasn't as close with his parents.
Got it.
My dad's, they were all a bunch of raging alcoholics.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I have nothing against alcoholics, but they were the bad kind.
Yeah.
And my grandmother died in her 40s of liver cirrhosis, and then my dad went through this downward spiral, and that's, I think, when things got a little weird.
So the whole family had it.
Yeah.
Or battled with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what during that time of the divorce, how did that play out for you? Was it just fighting and just didn't feel like a good environment, or how did that play out for you at 12 years old?
Yeah, so when things started getting ugly with my parents, I mean, it was pretty violent and crazy. It's because my dad was still a member of the police department. He would get away with a lot of weird shit, and he would pick us up and be drunk, and he carried a gun in his glove compartment. And my mom would call the police, and they'd be like, "Yeah, there's not a lot we can do." So it was weird. And by the time they told me they were getting divorced at 12, I was actually just incredibly relieved.
Mm-hmm.
It was just I was just excited not to have to be in the same room with both of them together.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then you said it took a couple years to kind of just mellow out and you find your place in all of that. Is that how it was?
No, it was a messy divorce for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom moved on, and we moved into this condo with these other single women. Now, it was actually really cool and a lot of fun. But he was, he would just show up, and she'd go on a date, and he'd show up and beat up the guy that she was on a date with, or be brandishing his handgun or something a little crazy. So it took probably 2 years for that to completely go away, and for my mom to sort of move on. And
yeah, that's scary. It'd be really scary to try to be dating a woman and her husband is an alcoholic police officer.
Psycho, and he used to be ex-bodybuilder.
Oh man.
Yeah, no, he was pretty intimidating.
Yeah.
Of course.
Was there any
also super fun guy, and actually really
Yeah, I would imagine.
Funny.
Yeah, there's always the other side.
For sure.
Yeah. Was there any interesting, did you ever, was there ever murder scene photographs around the house, or any interesting childhood things like that?
Yeah, it's funny
Really?
that you would ask that. Yeah, so during the sort of the bad years when my father was going through this sort of like rough time and was drinking more and he was, gambling and cheating and just all of those things. And when my mom said that she was going to file for divorce, he started like panicking and he basically came home one night and was telling me about like how sad it was that we weren't going to live with him anymore because he had just come from a case where a girl about my age had been basically sliced in two. And I'm like, yeah, like that's really
Cool,
sad.
Dad. Thanks.
Yeah, so it was so there was like a lot of just and it was more just like a lack of understanding of how to be appropriate. I think just developmentally he maybe wasn't super aware of clearly wasn't aware of childhood development, but I just think because he was in such a bad space, he
Yeah.
was just like he was a disaster.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I definitely had a lot of when I was a kid. I had a lot of fear, like going to bed at night and stuff, just from stories. And he would like give me these pop quizzes for like that you walk into a warehouse and there's a guy hanging from a noose and a puddle of water underneath him. What happened?
Oh man.
And then eventually I would get to like,
You're
oh,
like, Dad,
he
I'm
stood on an
10.
ice cube, right?
Yeah.
And then he'd be like, so it was like, it was a bizarre relationship. And actually, after my parents got divorced, I still spent a lot of time with him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was confusing.
That's so interesting. And because you were the oldest, were you also kind of the protector to your siblings, or
Yeah.
like you were right on the front lines of all of this,
For
right?
sure.
You had to kind of pad them, or
Yeah, both like literally physically. There were times when I would like jump into situations. If my dad was like attacking my mom or something, I would like jump on his back and like I would like get my brothers out of the house. And there was one time that my mom locked him out of the house, and he like broke through a window, and and I locked my brothers and I in a bathroom together, and like kind of it's funny. I'm describing it sounds like with the glass castle or something. It's not. I guess it is dramatic, but it's not like it was like I'm traumatized. It was just sort of a crazy time.
yeah, I think that when you're that age and that's just life, you don't have anything to compare it
No.
against, right? So you're just living it,
Living it.
right? You're not like, man, I miss my old life back when I was 6.
No, and I shouldn't say I wouldn't have it any other way because obviously there was domestic violence and alcohol. Like it's all like not great, but I mean every bit of my childhood experience made me who I am today.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that part of it.
For sure. And what did it make you like? How did you behave and how did you act? Like how did it affect you, or maybe not? But at that age, like, did it make you? Were you introverted? Were you extroverted? Were you, how were you acting at that?
Yeah.
age?
So in my earlier childhood, before things started getting a little crazy, I've always been very extroverted, and I was extroverted then, and I was just like the boss of my friends. Like, I mean, like literally, like I had a clubhouse in my backyard, and people had to like wear a jacket that said the slick chicks to like be part. Like, and so I was the boss of my friends, and so I was always in charge of everything we did. And as things started getting weird with my parents, I think I started getting a little less comfortable with having people over at my house.
Yeah.
But I don't know if my personality changed too much. Actually, no, I think I actually became a little bit of a bully. I went from being sort of a boss to probably acting out physically and beating kids up.
Yeah. I would see how that would happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also my question too is because like I'm at the age, I'm 32, and I'm at that age where you start kind of looking at your life and your childhood and all those things and how they affect how you act now, like in business and with relationships and with your employees and stuff like that. Was there ever any of that stuff that you felt like you like carried with you in a negative way that you had to work out, or did it ever affect you like that?
I don't know. I can't say that anything really affected me in a negative way. I mean, probably, in like romantic relationships through my 20s and maybe early 30s, I probably had some commitment issues and some other stuff going on just because I didn't have great role models really around that, and so I probably had a lot of like I was probably like jaded a little bit, and so I was probably not the most fun person to date. But
Yep.
in terms of my friendships and my career, no, I don't think any of it really negatively impacted me. If anything, it just made me like a very resourceful person.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like all of that and being the oldest through that situation would give you a little bit of like the ability to function and lead through any chaos. Maybe I'm looking too deep into it, right? But I think
Yeah.
that a lot of times you can kind of, when you look at people's lives and how they went, you can see where they maybe get these like unique skills. I'm guessing that you have to make big, scary decisions very often and lead a team and do all of those things. And it just sounds like at 12 years old, if you can lead your siblings through that situation, and nothing's really scary.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've had conversations where if I've talked about like being a fairly confident person and how I've always kind of been that way, and in other interviews I've said like I don't really know why I was so confident, but in this conversation I'm thinking maybe that had something to do with it.
Yeah, I wonder.
Nothing seemed that scary to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder. I'm just fascinated by like, and obviously I've done, 150 of these interviews. I'm so fascinated by like what makes people, there's things that can happen in your life that can absolutely destroy your confidence and your self-worth, and you never can be successful, and you're going to hypnosis every week to try to figure out why, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then there's some things that can happen where from a very early age, you realize you can handle anything. And, it just affects, it's interesting how it affects people's stories,
And it affects people differently, right? So
Yeah.
like there's the nature, there's nurture. Like I mean, my constitution just allowed me to get through these experiences in this particular way. And I mean, I wouldn't, like be critical of anybody who came out of it differently. But for me, it was just the way I reacted.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so then let's get into like school years. Like, did you perform well in school? Did you enjoy school? How did that go?
Grammar school, I didn't really. I mean, I was a little bit of a class clown. And again, maybe acting out stuff. I think I was smart enough, but I just, I always wanted to be doing something more interesting. And so, grammar school, nuts. In junior high, I had this interesting experience in junior high. So my junior high was like 7th and 8th grade. And I had this same group of friends. Like, so when my parents got divorced, I moved into a condo with my mom, and we had these women, and that's a whole nother story. And it was like super fun and a cool experience. But I still kind of maintained my friendship with the kids on the street that I grew up with, the ones that I bossed around most of their lives. And
What are they called? The slick chicks?
The slick chicks,
Yeah.
But in junior high, so in 7th grade, so I had the same group of friends, and there was this group of mostly girls, but some guys that were sort of like really popular in 8th grade, and they just had this like attitude, and they would walk down the hall and they would sort of like beeline, so like everyone would have to move out of their way.
Yeah.
And it made me furious. So I told my friends, I'm like the next time they do that, I'm just gonna like keep going. And they were like, don't do it. And I did it. And it turned out exactly as you would imagine. It was like disaster, right? So like we ran into each other. They were like, what's wrong with you? So my friends like that I grew up with pretty much abandoned me, and this group of kids made my life like a living hell for like most of the year. Like I would at lunch, like it got to the point where like I had friends and I was fine and life was fun, and we'd have brunch and we'd all go get chocolate chip cookies and cool. And then after this happened, like I would like hide out in the library.
Oh, man.
And I'd
Just because that one event?
The one event turned into like
yeah.
chaos.
But that's what started
Like
it
I
all.
was like enemy number one to this like group of people, and they were like the cool people everyone wanted to know. So now I was like enemy number one to everyone.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening was I ended up finding this other group of friends, and so I started kind of having people to hang out with. And one day, when it's silly to talk about, I mean, it feels weird to talk about this now, but like she challenged me to a fight, like in the wash.
Yeah.
And
Totally normal.
and totally challenged me to a fight. Yeah. And then so I was like, okay, I'll meet you in the wash tomorrow at 8 a.m.
It's like a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I at 8 a.m. I go to the wash, and I literally like I have a pink members only
Yeah.
like jacket on, and I'm just like, let's do this. And all these kids from the school show up, and they're all like around waiting for this fight, and she doesn't show up. Like she doesn't show up. So
So
like
you win by default?
there's like it keeps going. So I think I win by default. Like I
Yeah.
walk away, and everybody's like,
Yeah.
and like I walk back to my house to get my books for school, and I go into the house, and I get my books, and then there's a knock at the door, and one of my mom's friends who lived with us came to get me, and I was like in the bathroom or something, and she's like, "There's like a group of people at the door who want you to come outside," and I was like,
That's cheating.
"What?" So I go outside, and like all the people are in the wash. There's probably like 40 people. Do you know what a wash is, by the way? It's kind of like where like in LA, like water, like a lake or like a river. It's like a river.
I'm gonna be totally honest with you. I was thinking like a locker room shower.
Oh no, it's like a river. It's like a river where like the water goes from like the mountains to the ocean, but it's
okay.
like
Yep.
man-made.
I'm from
So
Ohio.
it's
Yep.
so I go outside my house, and there's like all the people from the wash, and then the two main girls from this pack are like there, and they're like, "We're here to fight you." And I'm like, "Okay," so like take off my pink members only jacket.
Two on one.
Well, so my mom comes out at this point and is like, "What's going on?" And I was like, "I'm going to fight these girls." And my mom is like, "Well, you can't fight both of them at the same time." So she takes my jacket, my members only jacket.
Yeah.
And then she is like, "Okay, one at a time." And
This is good.
like, yeah. So I start fighting one of them, Kim.
Did you know how to fight?
Yeah, because remember I was a bully.
Yeah. Okay.
So I used to beat up like boys in my grammar school.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
But
was
this
like,
is
you know,
good.
a
So
little
you're prepared.
badass
Yeah,
a little
yeah,
bit. So I start beating her up, and then like as things start going badly for her, the other main girl named Myrna,
Mm-hmm.
she pulled my arms behind my back, and so my mom, who was like, this part's really weird, but apparently during the fight, she was like picking up around like the house in the yard and found my brother's like baseball mitt.
Yep.
And like when she sees this happen, this part where Myrna grabs my arms, she's like, "That's not fair." And like comes over and like hits Myrna in the head with the baseball mitt.
Yeah.
And then Myrna starts crying, and like I trip her, and they both run away crying. And then like basically like in my memory, everybody like picked me up. And, like,
Yeah.
I
So
don't know.
now
It
you
was
win.
probably
And they're like lifting you.
they're
Like,
lifting
"Oh,
me.
no."
Yeah, exactly. Like it was like the sun was shining down.
Yeah.
And it was like, and it was like a life-changing moment. So I got my stuff back together, and then I went to school and got called into the principal's office, and then the principal was like, "Is it true your mother like hit one of the?" And I was like, "No, that's not what happened." So we get the whole story out. We were like all suspended for a few days. But then when we went back to school,
Look at that.
Yeah.
Everything changed.
everything changed. Everything changed.
And that stuck. That continued.
It stuck. It stuck. So then through then graduated to 8th grade, and all those guys went to high school, and then in 8th grade, I mostly mostly I just hung out at the park across the street from the school and smoked cloves and drink California coolers and listen to The Cure.
Really?
Yeah, that was mostly what I did.
Oh, that's amazing. I love when it's not like, well, I really got into like using Microsoft Word at an early age. You know what I mean? It's like,
No, I mean, as you can tell from like the character of my mom, I probably didn't have like the role models of like you need to just like go really dive into like your education or like a book. I was just like, what do they call them? Like latchkey kid. I was kind of a latchkey kid.
Yeah, that's so good. That's the story that I feel like needs to be like told more, because I feel like when people think of those kids, they think like, well, they're screwed.
Oh no, it was,
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then into high school, was it pretty much the same?
High school was pretty much the same. I ended up like still hanging out with this group of friends and listening to alternative music and punk rock music, and I hung out with like the Smokers and I really was not. I mean, my grades were okay.
Yeah.
But I wasn't. I was just like to be social and hang out. And at that point, I should also mention is when I came out.
Yeah.
So then I was
In
just
high
like
school.
in high school, like junior high, high school. It's like
And what did that do? Did that have any? What was the positive or negative effects on?
the positive effects. I mean, so my interest really became like girls, and once I was like girls, and this is another weird story that probably should be told more, but it was like I would like have like girls would stick their phone numbers in like my locker.
Really?
Yeah.
That were not out.
That were not out. So it was like I didn't have at this point in my life, I didn't have any experience of like crazy homophobia. I think because it was like The Cure, Depeche Mode, Culture Club, like this was the stuff that was popular.
Yeah.
Lots of the guys like I hung out with wore makeup, and maybe everybody was a little bit bisexual then.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it was like it was not a bad experience at all, and I got a lot of action.
Yeah. Wow. So that was overall a good experience.
Overall, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good story too. Because I feel like usually you think like, oh, that must have been terrible. Everyone must have bullied you. It must have been.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Plus, they knew if they bullied you, you'd beat them up. So
Totally.
really, I mean,
Had that going for
who's going to really say anything? And then, my other question is like, in high school, I guess, is where you start to at least maybe get your first glimpse of the future and like what maybe you want to do, and college is coming up. And did you start to formulate any idea of what you wanted your future to look like, or were you not really worried about it, or what did that start to look like?
I didn't really, I mean, I was, and it was like, I don't know how many young people like listen to your podcast, but like, don't do what I did. But like, I mean, I would like cut school a lot and go to the beach and go hang out in Melrose. And maybe like my senior year, when I realized I needed to do something, and friends started like moving and stuff, but it really wasn't like around a super ambitious crowd. So things didn't change that much. The year after I graduated from high school, I ended up taking courses at Pierce College. And I was like, okay, now I really need to figure out what I'm doing. And in that time, I was like, wait, I need to actually go to a real college. Yeah. And I started looking around at colleges, and then learned a lot about UC Santa Cruz, which is where I ended up going. But I ended up just like writing this crazy letter about my life and why I've never been into academics, but I really want to go, and somehow I got accepted. I don't even know, it was, I mean, I guess I wish I still had the letter, but it was like back in the days when you actually wrote things. So I got accepted to UC Santa Cruz, and then I moved from here to Santa Cruz, and then everything changed. Then I was like back to being like the boss and the leader, and I really excelled in school, and I started like thinking about world domination.
Yeah. And why do you think that changed? What changed at Santa Cruz?
Getting away from the crowd I hung out with, getting away from my family. I was the first person in my family to on my mom's side of the family at this point, I hadn't talked to my dad in years, but I was the first person in my mom's side of the family to go to college. And everybody sort of moved from Italy, then they moved to LA, and then everybody kind of stuck together. So it was kind of scandalous that I was even moving, 400 miles away. Yeah. But it was it just allowed me to sort of do completely hit restart.
Yeah.
And I grew up in this place that was very conservative. Even though it was a suburb of LA, it was very conservative. And I was always the most liberal, progressive person I knew my whole life. And when I moved to Santa Cruz, I think I became the most conservative person I knew overnight.
Really?
So that was sort of crazy too, because I was just around all of these people who just had such a different way of thinking about the world. And I think it just allowed me to I guess be my best self.
Yeah. That's really cool. That's really cool. I don't know that I've ever talked to someone who had that radical of a shift from their high school sort of whole behavior and everything to college and really opening up like that.
Yeah, it's shocking. Every time I go to an event in my hometown, my parents are always showing me off to the old principal and any teachers that were around at the time, and they're just can you believe it? She's still alive, and she actually made something of herself.
Thriving, yeah. She's not a UFC fighter.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing. What so I have to ask you this, because this is obviously a big topic, is what are your thoughts on what young people should do after high school? If you could just give, I know nobody likes to give kind of general advice, but there's the debate about college and if it's necessary or not. A lot of people say you should go intern or travel for a year, take a gap year. What are your general thoughts? I'm curious because of your experience.
Yeah, I think the idea of a gap year is a really good one, but it needs to be a gap year where you aren't just like sticking around and doing the same things you were doing when
Yep.
you were in school, right? Like I think getting away, breaking away from all of the mindset that you've like been around your whole life
Yeah.
helps clear the space enough to decide what you want to do next. And I think people who just jump right into something don't necessarily have the opportunity to consider what they want to do because at that point you're still under the control of your parents or
Yeah.
the friends or family that you've been surrounded by. But I think if you have some space to be like, okay, what do I really want to be doing? There's something about being like, I chose this
Yeah.
that makes a big difference. And so I think traveling, I think taking courses, I think you know trying some things that you've never done before, whatever, as long as you're giving yourself that space to really realize where you want to go
Yep.
is important.
Got it. So to you, it's not as much about college, no college, gap year, no gap year. It's just get some space in between and do something.
Yeah, the college thing for me, obviously, I mean, like I worked at Apple Computer for a long time, and Steve Jobs is a huge idol of mine. So I understand that success isn't college isn't required for success at all. But I do think it develops some skill sets that become important later. I mean, most of my family didn't go to college. And when we're having conversations about big issues like politics or whatever might be going on, honestly, their lack of ability to sort of think through things sometimes critically,
Yep.
it can be frustrating to me because it's like they have this state of mind and it's the same state of mind they've always had and it's just the way they operate. And I think going to school and surrounding yourself with a lot of strangers who are constantly pushing you to think about things differently and challenge your stereotypes and your beliefs, and you meet people from different parts of the world. I mean, it just opens up your brain so that when you do get out into the world, you're not smarter necessarily. And I don't think college makes you smarter, but I do think it forces you to develop some tools to deal with people in a different way. And I think the only distinction I would make between people who went to college and people who don't is very often people from college are sort of groomed to understand that language. I think college, I know people who also like are fully academic and don't have the ambition
Yep.
that some of the people I've met have that didn't go to college because they just had that like fire in them.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. There's no one answer. What? So then you're in Santa Cruz. You've sort of gained this new ambition. Would you say that you really gained like a general sense of ambition there? Like you weren't really concerned about what you made of your life in high school, and in college you were like, oh, I can take over the world. Is that how it went, or am I misrepresenting
Kind of went like that.
that?
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
amazing.
there's a thread. There was a thread that went through my whole like life experience, and that thread was like, I want to be like a winner of some sort. I want to like be able to influence people. I want to be able to think differently or push back or not necessarily follow the crowd. Like,
Yep.
I am going to pick on the bully in school. I'm going to be the person who's like going to be the first person of my friends to go to like a mosh pit and like
Yeah.
at a punk rock concert. So there was always this thing that pushed me to like do more, but it didn't sort of manifest in this like collegiate and career ambition until I went to Santa Cruz.
Yeah. And then was it at Santa Cruz that you started to gather what direction you wanted to head and what was going to set you up to begin your career? Or how did you start to gain that even sense of like, oh, maybe I'll look into this? Or, because once again, that's I do have a lot of young listeners. I don't think so much high school, but maybe just after. And one of the biggest questions is, how do you find your thing, right? Everyone is like, I'm ready to put in 110%. All I want to do is be successful. I just don't know what my thing is. Mm-hmm. So, my question is, how did you start to gather what direction you even wanted to head?
For me, it was very organic. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, I mean, one of the less crazy things about my life is I was really into theater and music. Mm-hmm. So when I went to Santa Cruz, I actually went as a performance art major. Mm-hmm. And thinking that that's what I wanted to do. And so I think I always kind of had that a little bit, like maybe I'll be a performer of some sort. Once I got to Santa Cruz and I actually started spending a lot of time with performance art people, I realized I didn't like performance art people and I couldn't actually spend more time with them.
Yeah.
And doing sort of the undergrad courses, I realized that psychology was something that I really seemed to excel at. So I changed my major to social psychology. And then I started being like, here's something I really love and I'm pretty good at it and I'm just going to keep doing that. I didn't think about it beyond like, where does this lead to necessarily? But I was like, I think this is the first time that I sort of came across something that I was like, I kind of felt like I was meant to do.
Yeah. And that ended up being your major? Social psychology. And then where, okay, so then what about like kind of the gap from college, developing all of those things, finding your major, finding something that you're interested in, and going out into actually getting a job, finding your place in all of that stuff? Where did that start? Like, how do you go from, I mean, I might be jumping way light years ahead, but how do you go from that to Apple?
Yeah.
You know, like that.
Yeah. Well, so I had a lot of fun in college. I think the only thing about college that wasn't great is, you know, like many people, it put me in like pretty heavy debt.
Yep.
So I did odd jobs when I was in school, and I wasn't really particularly good at them. Like I mean, I was pizza delivery driver, and I got fired like my second day because I had no sense of direction, and like the pizza would be cold by the time I'd arrive, and so it was like working necessarily wasn't like something that I loved to do. It was just like I had to pay my school bills. And it was because I was just doing these odd jobs where I was just like executing these tasks. It was really after I graduated that I ended up sort of working in retail that I was like, I quickly would be put in these like managerial roles. And I didn't necessarily think I would stay in retail, but I just kept getting promoted and it meant more money and it meant I could pay off my school loans more. And I ended up in this pretty big role for my age at Macy's West in San Francisco. And I sort of made enough of a name for myself that the recruiter who was hiring the team to build the Apple stores got my name and called me, and I went there, and it's just for me, what I realized is it's like leading, building, growing things. Like that's the place I need to be. If I could be in that position, whatever that looks like, that's what I love doing, and I'll keep doing it until I get the next job and the next job. And when I was at Apple, they paid for me to go back and get my master's degree. So I actually went back. I had paid off my undergrad and got my master's degree in organizational development, which is a sort of a subcategory of social psychology, but it's very more business focused. And so that sort of things just kind of came together.
Yeah, that's so cool. So that
just following signs, like just following signs, not leading things to someplace, just following them.
Yeah, that's big too. I just feel like there's so much like content now about, you know, being clear on your dreams and get your goals together. A lot of that's great, and goals and dreams are all very important, but like it almost feels like if you're sitting at home in your bedroom and you don't know what step one is, there's a huge gap between here and there. And I think it's also it's not talked about enough to just get out there and do the next thing that feels right and work hard and do a good job and see kind of where that takes you, you know? You don't hear that on YouTube videos or podcasts.
No,
You know
I think
what I mean?
I've talked to a lot of people about this, and I think that could lead to people being maybe disappointed or like having to do a lot of like, you know, backtracking and pausing and what do I really want to do? Because by the time you finally are like, well, maybe like I should just see what I'm good at. Like sometimes it takes people a while.
Yeah. And then just for the portion of the story at Macy's West, were you in like a manager role, or what were you doing there?
Yeah, when I started there, I was manager of tabletop, which is like China and crystal, and I actually know quite a bit about China and crystal.
I bet.
And then I ended up being like the manager of like the cellar, and then I ended up being the manager of like the domestics, and then it was like the home store, and then it was like the Christmas store, and then I became the regional merchandising manager for like California and the Midwest and for the home stores. It was just like, it was kind of just like fun for me to just kind of see what I could do next. It was just sort of like I didn't, like at that point in my life, I wasn't even asking for the promotions. I was just kind of like being moved.
Yeah. And then that just spoke for itself. That's how the headhunter found it, and you got sent to Apple.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways in which I think I was successful at Macy's West, which was maybe different than some of my peers, is that it was it was like the 90s. This is a, department store, and it's a very sort of formal, hierarchical environment. And the leadership styles were very sort of autocratic. And there was like a right way to do things. And because I don't ever subscribe to the idea that there's a right way to do things.
Yeah.
I just had my own style, and I ended up being sort of successful despite not following a lot of the practices there. And it was actually, there was a guy that I worked with on a project, and he was like the head of visual. He was like in charge of like the windows for Macy's. And he worked with me on a project, and he observed, I didn't even know him very well. He sort of observed me and thought that I was sort of different. And but my results were always really good. And so he actually went to Apple, and he was in charge of a lot of the creative stuff there. And he actually gave them my name because he was like, here's this person who's in this like super conservative environment who's like doing things in a different way, and it might be worth calling her. So it was just like kind of lucked out that he took notice and then brought me up to someone else.
Yeah, that's so cool. And at the time, were you like, was that really cool to you, or was that just a slightly better job, or like what was Apple?
Oh my God. So, I mean, I was in San Francisco, and the Santa Cruz campus had an Apple lab. I was a huge Apple fanatic. And at the time, this is during the first tech boom in San Francisco. And so many of my friends were in technology, and they were like, IPOs and becoming directors and like working at CNET and all this stuff. And so at that point, I was like, well, I guess I'm just destined to be in retail forever, and I'm working department store. When I first got the phone call, there's you probably don't know, but there's the thing that used to be called an answering machine.
I've heard of those.
we had an answering machine, and I got home from work one day, and there was a message from an Apple recruiter, and I was like, oh, clearly they got the wrong number. Like, why would somebody from Apple be calling me? Like, I didn't even have like an email account. Yeah. So once I found out that it was actually not a mistake, I was thrilled. Yeah. Thrilled.
That is so cool. And then were you working at Apple while going to college, doing both?
No, at that point I had graduated. I'd graduated undergrad. When I worked for Macy's, I had already graduated from college. Yeah. When I went to Apple and I was part of this team, I think I was 2 years in when I went back to school, and then I was doing both for a couple years. Yeah,
that's crazy. Was that like super crazy or not too bad?
It wasn't super crazy at the time because I was like probably, young enough and sort of like willing to do whatever. So, I mean, there was one time when I was in New York opening the Soho Apple store, and I flew back like that night for a final in the morning, and then took the final and flew back to New York to open the store. So it was pretty crazy time, but there was a lot of energy and excitement. So it was just kind of like, there was just, it was a lot of adrenaline.
Yeah. And then, so what happened was you were a part of the team that helped launch Apple Source, correct? The first, how many, 25 or something? Was that?
Yeah. So when I started Apple, there were no Apple stores, and I was part of this team to help create this vision. And I was hired by Ron Johnson, and it's funny because I remember even interviewing with Ron Johnson, and I had been working in this, like I'd been wearing suits to work, and I drove to his house in Atherton to meet with him, and he came to the door in like shorts, maybe boxers, and he had no shoes on, and like a t-shirt, and he was like, "Come on in," and like, do you want a drink? And I'm like, this is awesome. Yeah, this is awesome. So then I got hired. That's what you hope
for when you hear stories about Apple.
Oh my gosh. It was like, oh.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I was part of this team of 7 people that Steve and Ron and this woman Laura Wynn, like they put this team together, and I was part of that team, and we spent a year just sort of developing like, what would it look like? Where would we locate them? Should we stack up computers, or should we display them on shelves? Like, let's create this space that we're going to call a theater. And like, what if we set up this bar and like people could have their like computers fixed there? And actually we thought that was like an idea that was just like kind of stupid, that wouldn't last.
Yeah.
yeah, it was an amazing experience. It was like being part of a, $1 billion startup, and we were able to do all of the things in retail that everyone would do if they were like, if I could just create a retail concept now and I had the money to do it and we are going to do everything right,
Yep.
this is how we do it. And we built the store in this place called Bub Road, and it was hidden, and Steve would come once a week and walk through the store and be an asshole and
Yeah.
like then storm off, and we'd have to redo everything. And
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so cool. And I would imagine, once again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine that it has to be so cool being it was a small team, right? How many people total?
Yeah, initially it was 7 people when we first started.
Okay, so 7 people that are responsible for something that ended up becoming so big.
Yeah.
Was that did it feel like that, or am I?
It felt incredibly exciting at the time, and there was definitely, we had a lot of big ideas around where it would lead all of us and what we were a part of, and so on. I don't think any of us at the time, or even like years into it, realized that it would become the most successful retailer in the world. I mean, it was like,
And like the model,
Yeah.
like there's literally a store. I don't know if you're aware of this or not. There's a store called MedMen that's
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
legal
Very
weed
familiar.
shop,
Uh-huh.
and their whole thing is they're the Apple Store of,
Right,
you know what I mean? Everything's the Apple Store of something, right? And it's like that
everything's
just,
the Apple Store or something. Yeah,
that just has to be a pretty cool
it really is.
feeling.
It
you know,
is.
So you'll always have. No one can ever take that.
No one could ever take that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I have to ask you the obvious question, even though I hate asking these type of questions on this show. What was it like working with Steve? Were you around him a lot? Was it everything that we would think it is? Was it a
Yeah.
nightmare?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't work with him directly a lot. I definitely, spoke to him and interacted with him.
Mm-hmm.
He's, he's a crazy genius.
Yeah.
He is like lightning quick in terms of his ability to think through things and respond to things. He's definitely an asshole, but like because he's such a genius and because it's not ego based,
Yeah.
somehow it's like it's acceptable to everyone.
Yeah.
He's just like, and he's just right.
Yeah.
He's right. So it's like, he doesn't storm around with, some big ego and try and like prove how like impressive he is. Like it was never about that. It was always just like, we need to do the best version and the best job and the most and the perfect. And so it was just like for him, it was his criticism was just because he had this inner need to just like make everything amazing.
Yeah.
And he didn't have like necessarily the social skills to like put it through the filter that most of us would put it through, because he was like, I'm just about expediency and getting the message from here to here quickly.
Yeah.
And that's part of his genius. So yeah, it was probably much like everything you've heard.
Yeah. That's so cool. Okay, so then, where do you go from there? It was the situation kind of like help us open up the beginning, and then it's you want to move on from there. How did that come to an end? And then my other question is like, did that raise? I'm guessing that must have just sent your resume through the roof, right? Because you were part of this team, and like now you can
For
kind of
sure, yeah,
go
for
to another
sure.
level.
For sure. I mean, it's like Harvard on your resume or something.
Yeah.
I was there for like 5 or 6 years, and my last couple years actually. So I finished my program, and I was asked to be a part of this. So at a lunch meeting I was at, and I met with this guy Dan Walker, who was the chief people officer for Apple.
Mm-hmm.
He and I were talking about the Apple stores and what I was doing there. And I had opened 25 stores. My whole point of my job was to create this opening process where it's like stores could just be open like that. So it was just like, you find the location, get it built out, get the team trained, get the PR out there, get the marketing out there, move on to the next one, do the same thing, and like do it quickly. And really after a couple years, like I had it kind of down, and I was getting a little like, okay, what am I going to do next? And I had finished up this program at USF, and Dan asked me if, because I had finished this program in organizational design, which is a lot about like infrastructure, and he asked me if I wanted to be a part of the restructuring the staffing department at Apple and working on, building out the new process and systems and helping hire people and profiling people and so on. So I did that for maybe 6 months and helped bring like the recruiting from being outsourced to like within the company, and helped build the models and profiles and like some redundancy elimination. And about 6 months into it, I had lunch with him again, and he said, how's it going? And I said, good. And he said, is there, what kinds of things have you learned? And I probably list off a bunch of things, but one thing I said was, this is sort of a strange comment, but I noticed that most of the people in the worldwide operations department are looking for electrical engineers. It seems like a lot of people are talking about electrical engineers and how hard they are to find. And, I'm just wondering, because most of the electrical engineers who work here, they're like young white men, and that's sort of a like diminishing population. Like, could that be part of the reason that everybody's fighting for these same people? And should we be like reaching out and maybe doing some other things to try and connect with other types of people? And he was like, I've been thinking we need some kind of a diversity or multicultural marketing department here. So I go, why don't you go run that?
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know anything about that. And he was like, no, that's exactly why you should do it. And, because you won't be, forced into all the same models that everybody else uses. So I did that.
Wow.
And I worked with like a lot of women's in technology group and historically Black colleges, and building out like curriculum for, connecting us to like these different groups of people so that we'd be part of this pipeline. And I did that and I, built out the department, and I had the opportunity to work on a bunch of like marketing campaigns. And then, like all my friends thought I was so cool because I had this really neat job, and I was called like chief diversity officer at Apple. And is like, but I hated the job. Actually hated the job. Yeah, I mean, it was like a lot of sitting at a desk and creating presentations, and then I'd go out and I would speak, and I'd like talk to like deans of colleges, or I'd talk to students, or I'd talk to, I'd be the spokesperson for Apple. But I really like the action of being in the business and driving results. And I started feeling that when I got a phone call from a recruiter from a company called Design Within Reach. And at the time, they were based in San Francisco at the time, and they were a growing company, and they had just, been listed on the NASDAQ, and they wanted to be the next Apple, because ever since I left Apple, everybody wants to be the next Apple.
Yep.
And I'm a collector of mid-century modern design furniture, and I thought this is really cool, and I can work right downtown, because at this point I was commuting across, from San Francisco to Silicon Valley. And so I took the job, and it ended up being like kind of a nightmare experience. I think it was my only bad work experience.
Really?
Shortly after I got there, the CEO who was in place, he shall remain nameless, ended up being like, fired because of some like SEC violations.
Oh, wow.
And then the person I worked for at the time, who was the president of stores, my second day, she was fired from her job.
Jeez.
And long story short, it was like there was 3 CEOs in the 1 year I was there.
Yep.
And there was a lot of like crazy stuff. Years later, they ended up like going bankrupt, and they were bought out by another company and moved to New York. But there's still stuff I learned from it.
Yep.
But it was very weird going from someplace that felt very like sort of utopian to this like crazy environment. But also really good to learn, and lots of like, I would never do that, or and I bought, I got a lot of furniture at half off.
Yeah, that's a good deal.
So that's worth it.
It was worth it.
That's worth ruining my
For a
career.
year, yeah. Take it.
And then I just, I got a job running from there. I actually ended up becoming like the head of this beauty company with 70 locations, and got a job that I was way underqualified for, again, because of my resume, and ended up just figuring it out.
Yeah.
And then we sold the company to Regis in Minneapolis.
Yep.
And I didn't want to move to Minneapolis. So I had been contacted by Pete's Coffee and Tea for a couple years when I was at this job. And when I got the offer to go to Minneapolis, I called Pete's up and I said, hey, do you still want me to come work there? And they said yes. And so I moved back to the Bay Area.
Yeah.
I'd moved from the Bay Area to LA, and then moved back to the Bay Area. And then I was at Pete's for like 6 years and had an awesome experience there.
Yeah. And were you opening retail stores for them too, or?
Yeah, I had different roles in the time I was there. Again, it was like a situation where I progressively would be getting bigger roles and more responsibility. By the time I left, I was the vice president of retail strategy, and I had Pete's Coffee had been taken from public to private, and this company JIB that bought Pete's ended up buying Caribou, and so I converted like 30 Caribou stores to Pete's stores. I think I opened like 100 Pete's stores. I redesigned the sort of design and prototype of Pete's stores. So I had a really good run there, and got to just do, I ran marketing, I ran product development. So I just kept learning more.
Yeah, that's so cool. It seems to me that at least when you kind of look over your bio, or that you really became like an expert of how to build brands at retail and scale that.
Yeah.
Is that accurate? Is that what you think you have a super
Totally.
strong?
I mean, I would say that would be my thing.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And why do you think most people fail at that? It's an incredibly hard thing to do, right? And I think to portray a brand at its growing size, and to, obviously there's all the logistics issues and stuff like that, but when it comes to like really scaling a brand at retail, what do you think like the number one thing is? Is it a lack of brand, a lack of customer relationship? Is it?
Well, everything's really interrelated. Brands, if a brand doesn't start out great, it's really hard to change that. So I definitely had the benefit of going to great brands and sort of like making them greater or making them bigger or scaling them. But I've never had a situation where I went to like a terrible brand and was like, and then like we made it a great brand. Like I think I don't think that happens. So I always had the good fortune to be part of companies that started in a really great place, and they were always like a strong brand with the best in class product, right? It was like those are the two things that are really hard to fix if they're. So if you start with that, then I think the mistake that people might make is really underestimating the complexity of scaling and growing. There's so many moving parts, and the thing I love about retail and the reason I've stayed in it is because it is like this massively intricate body of things where one lever affects another. And so I think for me, because I've always seen it that way and I've always looked at the way these things sort of connect with each other, I'm always like thinking about like, if we do that, the impact here, so I kind of think of it in a system way. I also have believed very, very strongly in servant leadership even before I heard the term servant leadership, and I think that was one of the things that made me different at Macy's. And most businesses and most people who are running brands focus a lot on the customer, like the customer is king or whatever, and they really spend a lot of time on that. And I think it seems like really obvious to me that you need to focus on the employee.
Yeah.
And it's not obvious to everyone, which is sort of shocking to me. But it's like when you're in the retail or the service business, like the brand is inextricably linked with the culture.
Yeah.
You can't separate them. So when you walk into an Apple store, the first time I walked into an Apple store after I left Apple, and the guy at the Genius Bar said to me like, "Hey, what's up?" Yeah. Like I felt really proud.
Yeah.
He didn't say, "Hi, welcome to Apple."
Yeah,
It's like that is the brand.
Yeah.
Like the people and their interaction and the pride they take in the business is the brand. And so if you're focused on the customer at the expense of the employees, eventually that's going to fall apart because consumers are not going to feel it.
Yeah, it's so true. It just seems so scary. Like to me, like I have my business and we're distributed in a lot of other retailers around the world, but we've never done our own. And one thing that seems really scary to me is like how to keep a brand strong at a growing scale, you know? And it's like if you have 200 doors one day, how do you make sure that when you walk into that store in, Columbus, Ohio, somebody's not getting a bad representation of what you are back home? You know what I mean?
It's the hardest thing.
Yeah. Would you say that's the hardest thing?
It's the hardest thing.
Yeah. And how do you protect against that now? Do you pop in and whatever that's called, undercover boss people? Or like how do you Is that
No, I
something you
mean,
can micromanage, or
it's not
Yeah.
something you can micromanage. Like you have to build it into the like fabric. And there are a lot of people I know that, definitely want to do the sort of like drop in and like, freak out. And, um, how would you react if you were like 20 something and somebody came in and like screamed at you? Like, would you be like, my loyalty to the brand has just grown, It doesn't work that way. So it's really about the secret to it is, getting every single person who's involved in the business, getting their interest aligned with the interest in the business, both like from an incentive standpoint and also just from a philosophical standpoint. Like, why are you here? What are you doing here? Why is this important to you? Why are you here versus somewhere else? Do you realize that you've been selected to be here because we feel like you're a great fit? And I think crafting that from the beginning is incredibly important. I mean, people are human beings, and things can get out of your hands, and there's always going to be some rogue person. But I think if you really develop enough integrity in who you are and who the business is, people are mostly good, and mostly are going to want to be a part of that, because there's still a lot of shitty places to work.
Yeah.
And if somebody has the opportunity to work for a brand they believe in, and they feel like they're working for working with and for like a leadership team that has their back and has their best interests in mind and wants to develop them and grow them, like you're going to get mostly the best people, the best versions of people in those roles.
Yeah, so true. I also think it's just, to your point, it's so important that even if the job is hard for the 20-something person in Minnesota, just knowing that you're working, there are clear values and you are working for something. It's not just like, oh, I don't know, I like clothes, so I sell clothes and I'll work hard to sell clothes because everyone needs clothes. You know what I mean? It's like having strong values and letting it be known what those are seems very important.
It's really important, and not just like putting them on a wall, but actually living them.
Yeah.
But that also is again where the beauty of a brand comes in, because if you have a great brand, people want to come work there. I mean, I don't know how many people are like, I would just really love to get a job at Walmart, and it's like, no offense to Walmart. I think obviously they do very, very well. And I'm sure if you're in a leader position there, you do very, very well. But I don't think people in high school and college are saying, I want to go work there. But if you have a great brand and you've got people who are like, I identify with that brand and I want to work there, that's where the sort of culture and the brand being like connected are so important, because you're like, you have people, you have their commitment at a different level when they're like, feel like they're part of something.
Yeah. How important do you think it is to have a founder and or CEO that is the brand? You know what I mean? Like how Steve was obviously for Apple, and then I think there's a lot of people questioning, will Apple be able to continue what they're doing without Steve?
Yep.
Because it's hard to just run it with a bunch of very smart business people and not, do you think that it's incredibly important, or would you say not so, it can be done pretty?
I think it depends on the business, and I think it depends on the skill set of the founder. I think the founder as a statement around the brand, or as a spokesperson, or as the inspiration around like, this is why we're here.
Yep.
I think having that exist stays important, because that's like the reason the company sort of came to be. And I think that's meaningful. If growing the business goes beyond the skill set of the founder, I think it can be detrimental. Because then that founder goes from being sort of a hero, this inspirational person, to suddenly coming across as like maybe in over their head, or, some sort of a critical or negative force. And then I think it can basically like grab back a lot of like the things that took so long to build. So I think there's lots of versions that are successful. I think Steve Jobs maintained for a long time his success. I think Tim Cook's done a good job. I think it's hard to keep getting better once you're great. I think there's also versions of like founder CEO partnerships that can go really well. And then there's versions where, people hand off the baton and say like, hey, like this brand still stands for everything it did. Like the founders of Tender Greens, like, Eric and I are still really close. Like, I think he created an amazing brand. I think he's a fantastic chef. He believes a lot in, crop diversity and in food justice. And so he's gone on to continue doing all of those things that brought him here. But then he needed to move on because it was going beyond the things he liked doing,
Yep.
and he had more to do.
Yep.
And so it was a very comfortable, respectful handoff because he was like, "Great, now you do the thing you're good at,
Yeah.
and now I'm going to go keep doing the thing I'm good at."
Yeah.
And so it worked out.
Yeah, because also, what about, one of the conversations I've had a lot is like, what about starting a brand and trying to give it the identity, let's say, that Tender Greens has, without ever having the story of why it was started, even if that person leaves. You know what I mean? Like, if you picture like the scenario where there's a bunch of just really smart business people that say, okay, we want to create a brand and this is our values and this is what it stands for, but there's just not that authenticity of a person, or you know what I'm saying? And I just feel like more and more, as I'm not saying it's impossible by any means, I just think it's really hard to do. And I think even more so with like social media and the way that people connect with individual people, and they want to know who the person is behind the
Yeah.
brand and what's the story and why, you know what I mean?
For sure.
It's just interesting. I don't even, it's not even really a question. It's just interesting.
It is interesting.
You know?
I think you do need to connect with people. I think very often there's like the personification of a brand is
Yeah.
the way to connect with people.
Yeah.
Whether it's the founder or the people that the founders were inspired by, or the people who are like now endorsing the brand,
Yeah.
or I think there has to be a reason to be. There has to be a why behind the business to make it super legitimate. I think there's different ways to do that, but people need to be told like, okay, this is my brand. These are my people. This is like something I identify with. And I think the greatest brands get that, but they get it through different people, musicians or sports heroes or founders. I think people just need to know, like, this is my lane.
Yeah. So then how did you end up at Tender Greens? How did that come about? Was that directly after the coffee gig, or?
No. So I left Pete's to go to Dry Bar.
Yep.
And I
Oh, yeah, Dry
actually
Bar. We
went to
interviewed Allie. I love
yeah,
Allie.
yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah.
When I started Dry Bar, I think they had like 25 locations,
Yep.
and they were at that point where it was like, okay, they were kind of growing more quickly than they could handle. They didn't have the infrastructure, and so that's like sort of the place I often come in.
Yep.
We restructured the business a bit, and I opened about 50 locations in my time there,
Yep.
and really had a really fun time. I mean, stylists are really interesting,
Yeah.
exciting people, and it's like they're artists, and so it's a great group of people to be around, and so the team was awesome, and I really, really enjoyed my time there. I just really wanted to totally lead something on my own, and so I was already a customer of Tender Greens. I'd been going like 2 to 3 times a week for years, so it sort of checked the box for me of being the kind of place I would go as a customer.
Yep.
And they were also ready for explosive growth. They're backed by Danny Myers, who's like somebody who's like a superstar in the restaurant world. I was a customer. They're based in LA, and they really wanted someone to like lead them, and so that they could go do what they wanted to do. And so the idea of that was incredibly exciting to me, which is why
So
I
cool.
came over.
And how many locations did they have when you started?
Oh, we've only opened, I mean, I've been there for a little less than a year and a half, and we have 29 today. I think I've opened 4 since I've been there.
Got it.
We're actually rejiggering a lot of things
Yeah.
before we go out and do the sort of 2.0.
Yeah. What's been the biggest challenge?
Well, the restaurant business is hard, for one thing. I mean, it's really operationally a hard business. And so I have a totally new respect for restaurateurs now,
Yeah.
because it's just, there's a lot to deal with in the business, from, safety to quality to supply chain to like E. coli breaks out in the romaine industry. I mean, there's just things that are unexpected. The other thing is this rise of third party like Postmates and DoorDash and Uber Eats and all these guys, like they're really changing the way consumers interact with the restaurant space, and so trying to navigate that while it's still all very new, and how much do you focus on the person who's like not actually coming into the restaurant versus like the focusing on the actual customers who are walking in every day. It's just it's fun, but it's like the playbook hasn't been written yet.
Yeah.
So figuring that out has been challenging but really fun.
And do you feel that it's like scary because it's that part of it is kind of out of your control? Like you can't. You know what I mean? Like you can't like personalize how tender greens is delivered.
It's super scary.
Yeah.
It's super scary. I mean, I was saying to someone shortly after I got there, like I've never been a part of a business or run a business where somebody was like intercepting my customer
Yeah.
and creating a separate experience, and it's really nerve-wracking. But this is what happened to hotels like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I've really spent a lot of time talking to people about that, like what happened when you get these folks just coming in and intercepting your customer, and like maybe they're, helping with the experience and getting the customer to come back, or maybe they're pushing your customer to someone else completely.
Yeah.
It's a trip.
And they could be, your delivery driver could have delivered 3 other things before you and might have done an Uber trip, and you might get some soggy tender green. You know what I mean? Like
Totally.
I've had amazing Postmates or whatever experiences, and then I've had terrible ones. Obviously, I know it's not the restaurant's fault, but it's still how you're.
But a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't. And so, I mean, like people just don't show up, just don't pick up the food. Yeah. Or it's late, or it's in some weird condition. Like, not every consumer realizes that that's not connected to the restaurant. And we certainly can't say, well, like, it's Postmates' fault. I mean, we're not going to do that. But that's.
Yeah. So that part is
real.
still to be determined. What's
Totally.
going to happen there?
What's going to happen?
Yeah. How big do you think, do you think this thing can be 500, 1,000, 2,000
Tender greens?
locations? Yeah. You think it can be in every city, every town?
I do.
Yeah.
I do, because like tender greens, so we source our ingredients from like the highest quality producers, farmers, etc. Everything is very socially responsible. It's made from scratch every single day. Every single restaurant has an executive chef. So the kinds of meals that you're getting out of tender greens are like 5-star meals. Like they're literally the same ingredients made by somebody with the same skill set.
Yeah.
But you're getting it for like $14 or $15
Yep.
versus like $30. Yeah. So I think that translates. I mean, there's 1,000 Applebee's across the country.
Yep.
So folks are paying, $15 for a really it's not necessarily the same quality.
Yep.
And, so you put a tender green somewhere in the Midwest, and somebody's like, oh my God, this is an amazing steak plate for like $14.
Yeah.
I've never tasted food like this.
Yep.
I think it has huge potential.
And that's obviously my next question is like, do you think that, well, I mean, you kind of have to think this, but do you think that this health thing will win? Meaning the way that it feels is everything's healthy, everything's yoga, mindfulness, like there's this huge thing happening, which I really like. But also we live in LA, and so you see all of it. In the rest of the country, Applebee's and TGI Fridays and those things are still just crushing it. Do you think that the general awareness of the country starts to change and health does win, and long term we are headed in the right direction there?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think that history would say that like the more information people have, sort of the better choices they make. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I would say cigarette smoking, for example, I mean, 50 years ago, people literally didn't know it was bad for you. I mean, it's hard to imagine that now, but people literally didn't know it was bad for you. And it's not that people still don't smoke, but a lot less people smoke. And when people do smoke, it's usually like infrequently, or if they do smoke frequently, they're aware that they're putting their health at risk. Yep. And I think the more people learn or realize that when you're putting like processed food or food with artificial ingredients in your body, like your body's not meant to process, and there is a direct relationship between that food and like how your body's performing. Like in LA, I think we really understand that. I think the more people learn about that, and there's a lot of forces out there to keep people from that information, right? Like there's a lot of lobbying and a lot of stuff to keep people from getting there. But I think you can't stop the movement as people start learning and they start going, well, what about this and what about that? I don't know that everybody will get to be a Tim Ferriss, but I do think that as information continues to travel and people learn about the benefits of eating like healthful or like whole foods, I think there'll be no stopping it.
Yeah. Is that a big part of your guys' efforts and strategy, is to educate people? Or do you kind of let that play out how it's going to?
We're trying to do a better job explaining to people why our food is very different from others. And I know when I was a customer of Tender Greens, I was eating the food and I knew it was delicious, but I didn't know why. I didn't know about the executive chef. I didn't know it was made from scratch every day. I didn't know it came from like the highest quality ingredients. And I think I still love the food and I still went twice a week. Yeah. But if I had that information, I probably would not only go more often, but I would be telling people and sharing that with people. Yeah. And so I do want people to know that and get that out there. But there's a lot of like what we call in the industry greenwashing going on.
What's that?
Which is basically people making claims about their food that's not true, right? And
like how healthy it is?
Like how healthy it is. There are terms that people use that don't have real like meaning or like any government back, like healthy, or I mean, besides organic, which is the one thing that truly has standards around it. And even those standards are kind of weird because you have to like be able to pay for certification and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, other than that, people say local. Yeah. There's no rules around what makes something local. Somebody says like, I saw on a menu the other day like natural chicken, and I'm like, what's a natural
just means
chicken?
It used to be a chicken,
right? It was a chicken, a real chicken, and now it's a dead chicken. So I mean, I want to get that information out there in an authentic way, which I think we can do through our advocates and people who know what we do. And through conversations like these and so on, but it's hard to be too markety about it because I just feel like there's just a lot of bullshit that people out there are just like, oh, they're trying to get us to believe something, and often that's true. So we're trying to do it in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. That just seems like the part that is so hard because that is true. And to be honest, when I was reading your bio and stuff before this, I didn't even think of the word executive chef. Or I love Tender Greens. I didn't think of a chef. Right. I still thought of like, oh, it's still, I don't know, I guess I don't want to say on a lower level, but the word executive chef makes you think, oh, there's real effort going into this stuff, right?
They're classically trained culinary experts. Everything is made from scratch. We're the only ones, like we get compared to, we're the only ones who actually are making food every day, making it. We're not scooping it. We're not reheating it. We're not like tossing something. Like we're actually making food every single day from scratch.
Yeah. See, that's, and even for me who lives by one and goes to it often, I didn't know that, and hearing that makes me want to have it for dinner tonight, right? It makes that change.
Totally.
But what seems like the biggest challenge is, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is explain to people why they shouldn't go to Applebee's and get that cheap dinner that tastes fine and pay the little bit extra to go to Tender Greens, right? That has to be one of the major points of gaining new customers, right? And how do you tell that story?
Telling the story and say, and if there is something like, if something does cost a little bit more than it does like at a fast food place, it's like, because of the ingredients we're using, because of because of the supply chain, we stopped taking cash about a year ago, and there's been a lot of blowback around it, but it's like, we're trying to find every way we can to keep the, like labor's costs have gone up, right? Like minimum wage has gone up. And that's awesome. Yep. But we're not going to raise our prices significantly. So it's like we have to find little ways to keep the business profitable without compromising any of the things that anybody else would compromise to do it. Yeah. And it's a tricky story to tell.
Yeah, that's tough. This is the other thing that I love is that after everything that you've done and accomplished and really big, achievements, you still say that you like everyone around you is smarter than you.
Yes.
That's one of your things.
Oh, for sure.
And I love that mentality, but how important do you think it is, no matter what level you get to keep that sort of mentality and try to...
Oh, I mean, it's incredibly important. I mean, as a CEO, like I need to be somewhat of a generalist and I need to know what good looks like, but I'm never going to have the like crazy intense expertise of like somebody who spent their entire life working on marketing. Yep. Right. So if I think I know more about marketing than my marketing person, then I've hired the wrong person. Yep. Like I would rather, be able to maneuver around and know that all the people around me are like having the best ideas. And sometimes there's tension, which is great too, actually, because you get a lot of really smart people in a room with really different points of view. And the person in marketing and the person in operations might totally disagree on something. And I feel like I'm still hearing the best version of each argument. I'm still at the end of the day going to call it, but I'm like, okay, there's no lack of information that's being included here. One of the things I say to my team all the time is if like we have an idea or if I have an idea and we launch it and goes out into the wild and it's like a disaster,
Yeah.
and anybody on the team is like, yeah, we probably shouldn't have done that. I'm like, that's they're not doing their job.
Yeah.
Like something can't get out of our like conference room into the wild without every single person being like, yes, that is the best idea. Because if it's not, then they need to like stand up, like jump out of the chair and be like, no,
Yep.
we can't do this.
Yep.
But if I don't have like really smart, confident people, then people are not, they're going to be afraid to do that,
Yeah.
and then I'm going to be missing out on a lot of information.
Yeah. I just feel like it's so common for people to like, as their achievements grow and their, you just slowly start to think you're the smartest person and everyone around you is just support for your
It happens
genius intelligence.
all the time. I think it's probably like the kiss of death.
Yeah. What do you think is, once again, pretty general question, just your opinion on where it's heading, the future of retail? Like I said, I'm in the apparel business. A lot of my retailers have had trouble, obviously, over the last few years. And the retail apocalypse is no secret, and Amazon is no secret. But at least for me, there's a part of me that thinks malls won't become completely extinct. Retail won't become completely extinct. Maybe it needs to scale back quite a bit. Do you agree? And if so, what do you think? What do you think the future of that retail shopping experience even looks like? Who survives? Who wins?
Yep.
What's it look like?
Yeah. So the retail apocalypse, I mean, I think there's a lot of drama around it because, frankly, we are over-retailed in this country, right? So there's too many malls, there's too much retail, and there's a lot of businesses and locations where there are retailers that just shouldn't be there anymore. And so they need to go away anyway. The fact is most people still shop in person. Still 80% of retail purchases still happen in person.
Yep.
So I don't think it'll go away. I think like the next step for retailers is to consider the journey of their consumer, right? So a lot of people are going after like experiential, which is funny because like the very first mall that was built was meant to be experiential, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a new thing to be experiential. Yeah. But instead of thinking about like all the bells and whistles of like, this is what we could be doing to make people come here. Yeah. I think it's actually like people need to think about the obstacles to why people don't come there, right? So if I go to a shopping area, first of all, like I'm busy. Yeah. There's traffic, it's like I've got all the stuff going on. So it's like the idea of being like, well, I could just purchase this online and then I don't have to sit in traffic and then I don't have to look for a parking space and then I don't have to deal with like an annoying salesperson or whatever. Like all the things that go in somebody's head that they're like, I'm avoiding by doing this online. Like don't get made up for by somebody like having like, a concert arena or whatever it might be in their center. So it's like, what are the obstacles and how do you like remove those obstacles and make people's lives better? And so you're like thinking about like the merchants, they're the developers who merchandise a space where people could like actually get multiple things done during the day while they're there, right? So it's like, at Dry Bar, I would really try and put locations where there was like a gym and where there was like a nail place and where like, so it's like, it's got to become a convenient part of somebody's day, part of their like the customer journey. Mm-hmm. And you don't focus, so much time on building this beautiful space, but then like have a fucked up parking garage it's like make it easy for people to park, make it easy for people to get the things they want, and so I think what people are going to start to realize is it's like people go online because things are usually in stock, because they don't have to sit in their car, because they don't have to interact with people, like remove those obstacles from the retail experience and then supplement like with the things that will make the person's day better all around, whatever that might be. And then we'll have more village-like malls places, and I think we're starting to see some of that. They become more gathering places for people, and it's not so much about the pomp and circumstance as it is like, I'm now around my people and this is a village and this is where I go to get my coffee and it's where I go to pick up my dry cleaning and maybe it's where I go to my dentist and maybe it's where I go to my chiropractor and then maybe it's where, I buy my outfit for tonight for the place I'm going to dinner and so it's more integral into somebody's life,
Yep.
I think that's the future. But there definitely will be a reduction in the retail spaces because there don't need to be so many.
Yeah, I feel like we're still far from over. I feel like a lot of the retailers that I talk to are like, I think we're good. You know, and I'm like, I think you should
No.
chop half still.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
there's yeah.
Um, okay, this is the last thing is you also said that you keep a group of friends that are very creative and very different from some of the like analytical business-minded people. Number one, I love that, and I think it's so important. I think even with me running a business, it's so easy for the people that you work with. I mean, all the people I work with pretty much are my best friends, right? How important do you think it is to have a break, a separation, this is where I work and these are the people I work with, and then I just have this group of friends that we just have fun with. We're not talking about numbers. Is that really important in your
Super
life?
important. Super important. I mean, I think if you feel like you need to be on all the time,
Yeah.
that really can degrade like your ability to be authentic. Like for me, being present and being authentic is the most important thing.
Yep.
And when you're surrounding yourself with people who maybe have an agenda or you're there to network or you have an agenda, you're not fully participating. And it's those moments of being authentic and fully participating that I think like sort of rejuvenate us.
Yeah.
And if you don't ever allow that, then you're just going to be like a robot.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that was really cool. I've never heard anyone just sort of say that in like so, I don't know, clearly. It was just like, oh, that is important. And you're not afraid to go to a concert or movies by yourself. We talked about that before we started recording.
I love it.
That's amazing. I'm going to work on that.
You should do that.
Yeah, it's good. Where do you see, like, obviously you're focused on 10 Degrees. I'm guessing you're going to be there for a while. Is there anything undone for you, or do you one day want to be the founder of your own thing? Do you have any hunger for that? Or like, where do you think you go from here? What do the next 10, 20 years look like?
I think where I go from here is, I mean, I love running a company, and I'm also, I'm like an advisor for one company. I'm about to be on a board for another company, and I love that. But what I really want to do eventually is be able to impact like multiple businesses and not just focus on one. So I have a lot of founders and CEOs who call me. They're startup, small businesses, and we have conversations, and I feel like I save them a lot of time because I'm just like, don't waste your time on these things. These are, and so I imagine like at some point, probably, I don't know if it's my next gig, but creating some sort of a like a retail like accelerator or
like an
incubator kind of
Yeah.
program, a retail
I was going
incubator
to say, would you
program.
ever do like VC type stuff?
Yeah,
or-
I actually I have some friends who are in the VC world, and we've talked about this because VCs are they supply money to founders with great ideas, but then they're like, oh my God, are they going to be able to like do the next thing? And so I think there's some sort of incubator that involves me working with VCs to help get these things off the ground, and I think that would be really rewarding also.
Yeah, that's awesome. That seems like a good next step. If you could kind of like take 10 Degrees where it needs to go and then take 20 businesses where they need to go and really
Totally.
just sail off into the sunset on your on your yacht. Last but not least, this is my big ender. If you could go back in time to, I'll say the 12-year-old version of yourself, right? Life's getting chaotic. Things are changing. There's a lot going on. Now that you see how this all played out, which is amazing. Your story is amazing. And you could just tell yourself anything. Is there anything that you would tell yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just do you, be the best version of yourself. And when people or things come along that distract you from that or make you feel like you're not good enough or you're not doing things the right way or, you're not ready yet or whatever, just believe in yourself and just keep focusing on you. Don't try and become someone else. Don't emulate someone else. Don't just like blaze your own trail, keep going, believe in yourself, surround yourself by supportive, positive people, and just like never question it. And I think it would be really reassuring to like know that.
Yeah. We nailed it. That was amazing.
It was awesome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for doing this, and it was great.
Super fun. Thanks.
Yes. Bye-bye, guys.
Guys, if you like that and you want to see more like it, as well as vlogs, other web series, and all the random stuff that I'm doing here on YouTube, don't forget to click that subscribe button. You won't regret it, I promise.